America's bracing for a political reckoning. Joe Biden's presidency, once sold as a return to calm and competence, now teeters under the weight of failures at home and missteps abroad. Approval ratings are sinking, allies are restless, and even members of his own party whisper about what comes next. This isn't just another bad week in news cycle. It feels like the final unraveling of a presidency. The question is no longer whether he can recover, but how country will navigate the fallout. The end may already be unfolding, one headline at a time, and clock is merciless. Number 1. The gathering storm around Biden. The presidency of Joe Biden now faces a convergence of pressures that appear overwhelming. What began as scattered criticisms of policy or performance has hardened into a widespread sense of disillusionment. Approval ratings that once fluctuated now remain stubbornly low, signaling that the public has shifted from disappointment to resignation. The language used within Washington no longer revolves around mid-course corrections or minor adjustments. It reflects open concern about whether Biden can continue to lead effectively. This moment carries the feel of inevitability, as though the storm clouds long visible on the horizon have finally arrived overhead. In the Capitol, whispers of doubt have grown louder, spreading from quiet conversations in congressional hallways to open debate on major networks. Lawmakers, staffers, and even allies sense that the administration is losing its grip on both narrative and authority. Biden's attempts to project confidence often collide with the reality of setbacks, creating a perception of drift. The presidency, once seen as steady if unremarkable, now appears fragile. Every misstep magnifies the sense that time is working against him. Political establishments thrive on predictability, and Biden's inability to reassure has left even supporters questioning his staying power. Outside Washington, the picture looks even bleaker. Voters coping with economic unease, cultural division, and foreign policy turmoil increasingly view Biden as detached from their daily struggles. Discontent crosses traditional partisan boundaries, leaving him isolated in ways few presidents endure. For many Americans, the question is no longer whether he is faltering, but how soon his presidency might unravel. The gathering storm reflects both elite doubts and grassroots frustration, a rare alignment that historically signals danger for leaders. Biden stands at the center of mounting forces that threaten not only his agenda but the very survival of his presidency. Number 2, the erosion of public confidence. Public confidence is the bedrock of any presidency, and once it begins to erode, recovery becomes nearly impossible. Joe Biden entered office promising stability and competence after years of turbulence, but the perception of steadiness has been replaced by widespread unease. Poll after poll reveals the same pattern. Americans doubt his ability to manage the economy, handle foreign crises, or bridge cultural divides. These are not isolated dips in popularity, but entrenched numbers that speak to a deeper disconnection between the president and the public he was elected to serve. Economic strain has been the most visible catalyst for this erosion. Families struggling with higher food, housing, and energy costs find little comfort in reassurances from Washington. Each failed promise of relief amplifies the sense that leadership is detached from lived reality. Cultural issues add further weight, as many Americans feel dismissed or even targeted by the rhetoric of their own government. When confidence wanes on both material and symbolic levels, a presidency loses not only approval but legitimacy in the eyes of its people. That legitimacy, once gone, rarely returns. The collapse of trust extends beyond the numbers into a broader mood of impatience. Citizens no longer wait for change, they assume disappointment will follow. This cynicism corrodes the authority of the office itself, leaving Biden unable to inspire hope or command respect. Every policy speech is filtered through skepticism, every promise measured against past failures. The erosion of confidence is not a temporary challenge but an existential threat to his administration. Once the bond between leader and public is severed, the countdown to political irrelevance begins. Biden's presidency now faces that countdown, accelerated by forces beyond his control. Number 3. A presidency weighed down by age and perception. Joe Biden's age has become the unavoidable backdrop of his presidency, shaping every public appearance and every assessment of his leadership. While past presidents have governed effectively into their later years, the perception surrounding Biden is distinctly different. His visible stumbles, pauses during speeches, and moments of hesitation fuel a narrative that he is no longer fully in command. In politics, perception often matters as much as reality. And in this case, the perception of frailty has hardened into a defining feature of his tenure. For many Americans, age is not a neutral fact, but a liability that overshadows policy. The effect of these impressions on governance is profound. Allies in Congress and within his own administration must continually reassure the public that Biden remains capable, yet their reassurances ring hollow when contradicted by images replayed across news cycles. Opponents seize on every lapse as evidence of unfitness, reinforcing doubts that already exist among undecided voters. Even when he delivers effectively, the moments of falter dominate discussion. The presidency depends on projecting vigor and command, and Biden's struggles in this regard leave him vulnerable to questions that no speech or press release can silence. History offers parallels to this dilemma. Leaders such as Woodrow Wilson and Ronald Reagan faced whispers about capacity in their later years, and those whispers shaped their legacies. Once doubt takes root, it rarely disappears. For Biden, the combination of genuine age-related concerns and relentless public scrutiny creates a cycle that magnifies weakness. Each appearance becomes a test he cannot afford to fail, yet the expectation of failure ensures criticism continues. His presidency is thus weighed down not only by the reality of advancing years but by the perception that time itself has become his most implacable adversary. Number 4. Economic realities and political consequences. No presidency can withstand the weight of sustained economic distress, and Biden's administration is proving no exception. Inflation has eroded purchasing power, leaving families struggling to cover basic necessities. Rising interest rates have compounded the challenge, making mortgages, credit cards, and loans harder to manage. Promises of relief through sweeping legislation have largely fallen flat, as Americans see little improvement in their daily lives. The disconnect between optimistic official statements and the reality of higher bills deepens the perception that the White House is out of touch with ordinary experience. Economic hardship carries political consequences far beyond approval rating. Kitchen table concerns shape elections more than any foreign policy achievement or cultural debate. When parents cannot afford groceries or young people despair of buying a home, their frustrations are inevitably directed toward the sitting president. Biden, once marketed as a steady hand capable of managing crises, now finds himself blamed for worsening them. Even sympathetic voices acknowledge that voters tend to remember failures far more than partial successes. In an environment of constant strain, the administration's credibility is drained by unmet expectations. The political fallout from these conditions is unmistakable. Swing voters recoil from an economy they perceive as hostile, while the Democratic base grows restless at the lack of tangible progress. Every month of stubborn inflation or sluggish growth compounds the impression of incompetence. The history of American politics is clear. Presidents who preside over economic malaise rarely recover. Biden faces the same trajectory, where financial insecurity translates directly into political weakness. The numbers on a grocery receipt or energy bill carry more weight than speeches in Washington, and those numbers point to the unraveling of his presidency. Number 5, foreign policy missteps on the world stage. The authority of a president is measured not only at home but also abroad, and Biden's record on the international stage has amplified doubts about his leadership. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan remains a defining image. Allies stunned, adversaries emboldened, and Americans questioning competence. What was meant to end a long war instead signaled disorder, and the repercussions continue to shape perceptions of weakness. Foreign policy, once a potential arena for Biden to showcase steadiness, has become another source of fragility in his presidency. Subsequent challenges have only deepened this impression. The conflict in Ukraine exposed hesitations between deterrence and escalation, leaving allies uncertain of American resolve. At the same time, China has tested U.S. influence in Asia, while Iran and North Korea exploit uncertainty with renewed aggression. Each episode reinforces the sense that Biden reacts rather than leads, allowing events to dictate strategy. For adversaries, this invites testing. For allies, it raises doubts about whether America can still be counted on as the anchor of stability. The image of a faltering president projects beyond borders, shaping global calculations in ways unfavorable to U.S. interests. At home, these missteps compound existing discontent. Americans weary of costly entanglements view the administration as mismanaging crises without advancing national security. The promise of restoring credibility abroad has instead turned into a chorus of questions about credibility itself. History shows that foreign policy failures often accelerate domestic political decline. From Truman in Korea to Johnson in Vietnam, Biden's presidency risks joining that list, with his global record feeding the narrative of decline. The world stage, rather than elevating his stature, has become a mirror reflecting his vulnerabilities for all to see. Number 6, the Democratic Party's dilemma. Biden's troubles are not confined to public opinion or international perception. They now extend deeply into his own party. Democrats once rallied behind him as the safe choice to defeat Trump and restore normalcy, but the passage of time has altered that calculation. Behind closed doors, party strategists weigh the risks of standing by an increasingly unpopular incumbent against the chaos of seeking a replacement. The whispers are unmistakable. How long can Democrats afford to defend a presidency so clearly in decline without jeopardizing their broader future? Potential successors are beginning to position themselves, careful not to appear disloyal yet eager to fill a looming vacuum. Governors, senators, and rising progressive voices circle quietly, testing their appeal with donors and activists. Their caution reflects awareness that open rebellion could fracture the party, but hesitation carries its own risks. Each month of Biden's decline leaves Democrats more vulnerable heading into national contest. The dilemma is not only strategic but existential. Can a divided party rally behind a faltering leader, or must it endure the upheaval of moving on? Neither option guarantees success. This tension exposes the fragility of Biden's standing within his coalition. Progressive activists demand bold action. Moderates call for stability, and both sides privately doubt his capacity to deliver. The Democratic Party thrives when it projects unity, yet the growing uncertainty around Biden undermines that projection. Every stumble becomes ammunition for critics outside the party and unease within. History suggests that once doubts spread among allies, a presidency stands on borrowed time. For Democrats, the question is no longer whether Biden is struggling, but how much longer they can afford to pretend otherwise. Their dilemma is both immediate and inescapable. Number 7, the media's shift in tone. For much of Biden's presidency, mainstream media outlets offered a protective shield, often downplaying missteps while emphasizing his image as a return to stability. That shield is now beginning to crack. Editorials and televised panels that once echoed White House talking points are increasingly highlighting his failures. Subtle shifts in headlines, story framing, and guest commentary suggest a press corps preparing for a post-Biden landscape. Media institutions thrive on narratives of power, and as his grip weakens, they adjust accordingly. The very voices that once defended him now speak with growing candor about decline. This change in tone matters because it reshapes how the broader public interprets events. When even sympathetic outlets acknowledge mistakes, doubts spread beyond partisan boundaries. Voters who once dismissed criticism as partisan now encounter it in places they consider credible. The media, intentionally or not, signals permission for disillusionment to become mainstream. For Biden, this is a devastating shift. Losing control of coverage means losing control of perception. Presidents rarely recover once journalists sense vulnerability, because coverage becomes an accelerant rather than a buffer. The transformation also reveals how quickly political loyalty can fade. Media organizations calculate their survival on relevance, not loyalty to leaders. As Biden stumbles, they distance themselves to maintain credibility with audiences hungry for candor. The result is a feedback loop. Declining approval fuels harsher coverage, which in turn accelerates the decline. This is not just an adjustment of tone, but a sign that elites who once rallied around him are now hedging their bet. For a president already struggling with perception, the erosion of media protection strips away one of the last advantages he held. Number 8, the rise of populist criticism. As Biden's presidency falters, populist voices have grown louder, channeling frustrations that cut across partisan lines. Concerns about border security, energy costs, and cultural upheaval dominate conversations in communities far from Washington. These critiques resonate because they arise from lived experiences rather than partisan talking points. For many, the sense is that elites in the Capitol have insulated themselves while ordinary Americans bear the brunt of flawed policies. Biden, as the face of the establishment, becomes the target of this rising tide of discontent. The power of populist criticism lies in its simplicity and directness. Citizens do not analyze GDP charts or foreign policy briefings. They measure leadership by whether their paychecks cover bills, whether their neighborhoods feel secure, and whether traditions are respected rather than dismissed. On each of these fronts, Biden is judged harshly. His approval ratings reflect not abstract ideological debates, but the cumulative frustration of voters who feel unseen. Populist movements thrive when leaders appear disconnected, and Biden's detachment provides fertile ground for their expansion. This populist surge poses a profound threat because it undermines not just a presidency but the broader credibility of governing institutions. When ordinary people conclude that leaders neither listen nor care, they seek alternatives outside the establishment framework. Trump's continued relevance, independent candidates gaining attention, and grassroots movements on the left all testify to this dynamic. Biden's decline thus becomes more than personal. It symbolizes a rejection of the system he represents. Populist criticism, once a background current, now surges into a wave capable of reshaping elections. For a weakened presidency, such momentum is not merely inconvenient, it signals the accelerating end of authority itself. Number 9. Historical lessons of declining presidencies. American history provides sobering lessons about presidencies that unraveled under pressure. Lyndon Johnson, once commanding, chose not to seek re-election in 1968 after Vietnam and domestic unrest eroded his standing. Richard Nixon, buoyed by landslide victory in 1972, resigned less than 2 years later under the weight of Watergate. Jimmy Carter, weakened by stagflation and foreign crises, faced a crushing defeat in 1980. Each case demonstrates how quickly authority can collapse once credibility is lost. Biden's trajectory now echoes these moments where setbacks harden into permanent decline. The parallels are striking. Johnson could no longer convince his own party. Nixon lost the trust of the public, and Carter seemed overwhelmed by events. Biden likewise faces eroding confidence among voters, allies, and institutions. His challenges may differ in detail, but the underlying pattern is familiar. A presidency once justified by promises of competence now burdened by perceptions of weakness. History suggests that once doubt becomes the dominant narrative, no amount of policy maneuvering can reverse the tide. Leaders are defined less by isolated achievements than by the cumulative sense of whether they command trust. Studying these precedents clarifies why many see Biden's presidency approaching its end. The collapse of confidence does not happen overnight but builds gradually until it becomes irreversible. Just as Johnson's speeches could not restore faith and Carter's appeals to sacrifice fell flat, Biden's reassurances no longer carry weight. The presidency depends on authority, and authority rests on belief. When that belief fades, history shows the outcome is predictable. Biden's situation is not unprecedented, but part of a recurring cycle, where leaders, despite office and power, cannot withstand the erosion of credibility. Number 10. What the end means for America. The unraveling of Biden's presidency carries implications far beyond his own political fortunes. It signals a moment of reckoning for a nation already divided and anxious about its future. Americans sense that the old formulas of politics no longer function, and the weakening of a sitting president underscores the depth of institutional fatigue. This is not just the story of one man's decline, but of a system straining under the weight of discontent. The end of Biden's presidency, whether formal or de facto, will mark a turning point in how citizens perceive leadership in Washington. For the Democratic Party, the challenge is immediate and profound. Remaining tethered to a faltering leader risks electoral collapse, yet attempting to move beyond him threatens internal fracture. For Republicans, the opportunity is obvious but comes with responsibility to present not merely opposition but a vision of renewal. For independents, the collapse reinforces skepticism that either party can meet their needs. In this shifting terrain, the presidency becomes less a position of authority than a mirror reflecting national doubt. The broader question is what America will choose after this moment. Will leaders respond by reconnecting with ordinary citizens, or will they retreat into further elitism and division? Biden's decline is a warning that detachment and weakness cannot endure indefinitely. The end of his presidency may bring uncertainty, but it also offers the possibility of renewal if the nation seizes it. For now, Washington stands at a crossroads, forced to confront realities it long tried to ignore. Joe Biden's presidency now stands at a crossroads that feels less like a challenge and more like an ending. The steady erosion of confidence, the weight of economic distress, and the repeated missteps on the world stage have left him with little room to maneuver. What was once framed as a season of stability has instead become an era defined by drift and doubt. For many Americans, the debate is no longer about whether Biden can turn things around, but how long the nation can endure a presidency that has lost its center of gravity. History reminds us that presidencies rarely collapse from a single event. They unravel when discontent at every level converges. Biden now faces that convergence, with voters impatient, allies restless, and critics emboldened. The real question is not just about his political future, but about what kind of leadership America demands moving forward. If you found this analysis meaningful, make sure to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe for more in-depth commentary on U.S. politics. Join the discussion in the comments below. Do you believe Biden's presidency has reached its breaking point, or can it still recover? Your perspective matters in shaping the debate.